Commemorate your special temple experience with History at Temple Hill Manti. This wonderful keepsake documents the trials and triumphs of the pioneers who sacrificed so much to build the magnificent Manti Temple. You'll cherish the knowledge of how this inspiringly beautiful and spiritually rewarding structure came to exist. Order your video cassette now for only $19.95 plus $3.50 shipping and handling. Send check or money order to Temple Hill Video, Post Office Box 900134, Sandy, Utah.
This St. George country is really amazing. You look around at this desolate area, you wonder how anybody could ever make a living here. White settlement began here in 1854 when Jacob Hamlin and other Mormons were sent down from Salt Lake as missionaries to the southern Paiute Indians along the Santa Clara River. Shortly thereafter, the need to have textiles that were costly to import and the Civil War caused Brigham Young to call people at the October General Conference, people of all different trades and crafts, so they came almost as a moving village and came down to settle. They probably weren't as aware of the visual beauty of the place because what they saw was a desert, a difficult river that was hard to tame, dry red soils, a place that would be a terrible place to try to make a living. In fact, there was a Mormon leader one time, J. Golden Kimball, who came down, gave a sermon in which he said, if I had a place in hell and a place in St. George, I'd sell the place in St. George and move to hell. Well, he got in trouble for it. The brother sent him back and said, Brother Kimball, you better apologize. He came back and said, brothers and sisters, I'm so sorry. I didn't really mean what I said. What I really meant to say was, if I had a place in St. George and a place in hell, I'd rent the place in St. George and move to hell. And that was the kind of reputation St. George had. But these people worked hard, endured hunger, privation, did everything they could to make their cotton mission a success. And they endured, and they persevered. They built a beautiful, orderly town with orchards, gardens. You see the red earth sharply contrasting the green of their gardens and of their fruit trees. And then in the background, the red bluffs, and beyond that, the Pine Valley Mountains. And at the center of it all, their symbol of faith and determination and perseverance and community, the temple. The temple built on a foundation of black lava rock, of red sandstone, but a temple dressed in white.
The Paiutes who lived here for many, many years, they probably had some ideal conditions when it came to foodstuffs. They had the Mojave Desert to the south. They had the Great Basin, which gave them a lot of the pine nuts that are huge, very good eating and drying. And then they also had the Colorado Plateau, which we were standing up here upon this area, in this area here. So I believe that they probably had the best of foodstuffs, I think, which made them also, I refer to them as the foremost ethnobotanists of Indian people around this area. They are also very excellent hunters. They were probably some of the best arrowhead chippers simply because of the materials that they had to work with here. They had, again, all these small animal game, also the bigger animal game, the cats, the deer, elk, all those that are still here. But they also were able to utilize seeds, roots, berries, willows, all these things to maintain their cultural lifestyle that they had. The Paiutes were pretty much an isolated area out here in the west where, as you look around this area, it was pretty harsh as far as living conditions, living environment, but they were able to really utilize that, make changes when they had to. They did not have any contact with Euro-America until probably when the gold miners started coming through here, but it also was one of the first established trails that led from the east to the west and came right through the Paiute country down in through Las Vegas and out to the coast. In fact, the Paiutes used that as one of their main trade routes. With the introduction of the horse to the Utes, though, this made them very mobile, and pretty soon they began to make trips down through here and out through into California, raiding and probably looking for more horses, and would return right back through this area. Also, with the horse being introduced to the Navajos through the Spanish, this gave them also the mobility that they started expanding their areas in terms of the hunting, and also the same thing of raiding. And because with wagon trains becoming a little more occurring a few more times now with people moving through the area, it left easy prey for them. But for the Paiutes, they were pretty much not a real fierce, or what do you call it, ferocious type of people. And whenever the people would come through here, they would probably spend their time just trying to stay out of sight. They did have gardens, they did have things along the river banks, so people that would come through here, of course, usually raided those. But about the late 1850s, the Mormon people began to send out their so-called missions to different areas.
In 1850, Brigham Young invited Parley P. Pratt and 50 other men to come south. He was interested to see if a colony could be established because he was interested in growing cotton. He could see that the Civil War was coming and knew that his people would need cotton for clothing. So Parley P. Pratt came to the influx of the Santa Clara and the Virgin Rivers, and in his report said that this was a good place to grow cotton, but it was an inhospitable place. It would be a difficult place to live.
About 1853, in October Conference, Brigham Young called 23 men to come to southern Utah on an Indian mission to teach the Indians how to farm, to make peace with them, and to protect the settlers. Jacob came with the group, and they settled in Harmony, and there they began to construct a fort. Shortly thereafter, Brigham Young's advice was followed by Jacob when he said, I need to get closer to the Indians. And so he and 2 others came on down to Santa Clara and began building a fort down here. They left the group in Harmony and came to Santa Clara where they'd be closer to the Indians. They had around their fort here in Santa Clara anywhere from 300 to 800 Indians at different times. And so they were much closer to their work here in Santa Clara. And at that time, they determined that they needed to build a dam. And as they went to build a dam in the Santa Clara River, the chief said the Indians would help them. And when Jacob went to build his dam, there were 800 Indians showed up to carry rocks and help them build the dam. So these Indians were very helpful and helped them build this dam. Later on, Jacob's wife, Rachel, determined with a number of children and an adopted Indian child that she was way overworked, and she suggested that Jacob take another wife at this time. Jacob then took as another wife Priscilla Leavitt. In 1861, December the 25th, it began to rain, and it rained for 40 days. This was very strange for the desert, but the dry riverbed in Santa Clara was soon running 120 foot wide. And one night, February the 5th, some trees washed down the river and jammed the creek and diverted the flood over around the fort. And they woke up in the middle of the night with 3 to 4 foot of water running around the fort, and they determined they had to evacuate as the fort was being washed away. Rachel just had a new baby, about 8 days of age, and she was still in bed. She could not do much, but in the cold water, which she was chilled very badly, she never did really recover this and was ill for a good part of the rest of her life. Priscilla, the younger bride, on the other hand, with the aid of a rope, she got the children all to hang on to the rope and hang on to her and hang on to each other, and she marched all of the children across the flood and to safety. Albert, the Indian boy, soon built a fire so that they could have warmth. Jacob finally helped an old woman across, and as she became frightened, she hung on to his throat as she carried him, as he carried her on his back. She choked Jacob down, and as he fell on the edge of the riverbank, they had to resuscitate him because she'd nearly choked him to death as he carried her to safety. But the next morning it was very evident. Their home had been washed away, their gardens, their orchards, all that they had been washed away. It was then that he determined to build the house in Santa Clara. And from the ruins of the fort, he hired some men from Cedar City, and they used the rock and constructed this house for his two wives. The room on the east for Rachel, and the room on the west for Priscilla. Jacob had a policy with the Indians that he never told them a lie, and he was always honest with them and treated them fairly. Shortly after they were down here, it was very evident that Jacob got along better with the Indians than the others, and so he was appointed the head of the Indian mission. There were many of these missionaries that spent a lot of time helping Jacob, and men such as Thales Haskell and Dudley Levitt, and many of these men spent a lot of time helping Jacob.
As the missions were established, certain people were designated to help in their conversion of the Paiute people, and one was Jacob Hamblin, who spent a lot of time as he went across the Arizona Strip area and also out to the Hopi reservations and was doing his work out there. But many times he was called on both sides because the Paiutes felt that he was honest and did a lot of things that they felt good about. And so he was also one of the church's confidant in terms of reaching out and talking and visiting and proselyting among the Paiute people and other Indian peoples in this area.
Dudley Levitt was my great-great-grandfather. They moved to Tooele immediately upon arriving in the valley, where he became acquainted with Jacob Hamblin. Jacob married Dudley's sister, so they were in-laws, and when Jacob was called to go to the Indian mission in 1854, he wanted Dudley with him. And so Dudley and his mother and their whole family packed up and left what was by then a comfortable home in Tooele and moved south to the Indian mission. They settled in Santa Clara in roughly 1854, which was a brand new area that had never been settled, and their objective was to eke out a living and to teach and make friends with the Indians. He was well respected and known for his ability to work with the Indians, along with Jacob Hamblin. Well, the first winter they arrived, they had very little food. They had to build dugouts in order to have shelter. And in the spring, they had what would have to have been considered probably a 500-year flood. The torrents completely ripped their houses apart, took all of their supplies, took everything they had and washed it away, left them with basically nothing. It was a very traumatic moment. They were 300 miles from the nearest civilization and having to rebuild in a land they didn't know. I've heard my dad tell about the difficulties of trying to harness the Virgin River. He said when as a boy he was convinced that they had horses so they could raise hay to feed horses, to build dams to have water so they could raise hay to have horses to build dams, and it was just an eternal cycle on the Virgin. On one occasion they were out at Pipe Springs together, and their purpose was to work with the Indians. They were the subject of a huge, huge storm that just inundated them, and they found that they were starving, and they had to draw lots in order to decide which person would sacrificed their horse.